Joining us now for Football at 4 is ESPN's Mike Greenberg, host of Greeny on ESPN Radio, which you can hear right here on The Fan every weekday from 10 a.m. to noon. You can also see him on Get Up every morning on ESPN, enjoying record ratings, by the way. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So we're just a couple days away from Chiefs versus 49ers, Super Bowl LVIII in Las Vegas, the gambling capital of the United States. And right now, the NFL is all in on gambling. ESPN is all in on gambling through ESPN Bet, and North Carolina in just a few weeks is going to launch mobile sports betting here in the state. Where do you see this marriage between sports, particularly football and the NFL, and gambling going? Are you comfortable with kind of where we are?
I am. This is a conversation that we've had on our show in the last couple of days, and I certainly understand people's hesitation when it comes to this, but I have been a proponent of legalized gambling for decades. I've always felt that when something is going on anyway in mass numbers, I believe gambling has been prevalent in the United States, particularly on football and other sporting activities, for decades. I mean, since before my time, and certainly it was when I was in college and other places. I knew where to make bets in college, and I did it all the time. And I think when you take those things out of the darkness and into the light, more good comes of that than bad. There certainly are concerns, some of them involving gambling problems, gambling addiction, all that sort of thing. That's why with every thing I do for ESPN Bet, we always attach 1-800-GAMBLER if you're feeling like you are in any trouble. And my rule of thumb has always been, as I've said to everyone, if you ever gamble with money that you cannot easily afford to lose, you're making a huge mistake. Stop immediately. And if you can't stop, seek help. That said, I think that the upside of this greatly outweighs the potential downside. And so I have been a proponent of it for a long time, and I think it is going about as I expected it to. And I don't think it slows down anytime in the foreseeable future. I think it continues going up like a rocket ship.
Where do you see it? I saw somebody today talk about the possibility of someday, the NFL and probably other sports being the bookmaker themselves in a lot of ways.
I don't know anything about. Certainly, I guess that's a possibility, but that is not only it's not something I don't know. It's something I don't know anything about. It's something I'm not really that concerned with. How that ultimately. Who it is that makes the billions of dollars in legalized gambling is of less concern to me than the fact that it is being made. It is being divvied up now amongst a lot of people, and it is being taxed. So rather than some guy on the street corner who will break your legs if you don't pay him back, people are making money on this legally, and they're paying taxes, and I'm all for that. So whether the teams themselves or the leagues themselves wind up being the house, that's something that remains to be seen, and that's something that I suppose will be decided by other people. It's not something I've given, honestly, almost any thought to.
It's hard to do these because we're kind of prisoner of the moment, but given Las Vegas, given Usher is doing the halftime show, the Taylor Swift drama, these two very successful model franchises, obviously Mahomes and Kelsey, all the 49ers offensive weapons, is this the biggest Super Bowl ever?
Well, I've seen people suggest that it's going to have the biggest audience ever. I don't really know. I suppose there were a variety of ways that one could define that. In the way you just did, I suppose, yes. Here's a Kansas City team that I think is playing for dynasty status. I believe a third title is necessary for a team to be described as a dynasty. Here's Patrick Mahomes playing to become the first football player ever to have 3 rings and 2 MVPs in his first 7 seasons, and he, of course, will have done it in 6. When you factor in the star power of Taylor Swift, which is practically unrivaled on planet Earth, and all of the intrigue surrounding her connection to it. And then, yes, as you said, the Chiefs have been here multiple times before. The 49ers have been here multiple times before. I don't see why any other Super Bowl would have been bigger. That said, my gut feeling is that if you ask me that question again next year, we'll probably say yes to that too, because this thing just continues to grow and grow and grow. But yeah, it's a good question, Brian, because it's something I hadn't really thought of. But when you take all those things into account, I think the answer to that is yes.
You're a guy who started your career, if I'm not mistaken, covering the Bulls in Chicago and during the Michael Jordan era. At that time, could you have imagined that football, the NFL in particular, would be as dominant a force as it's become? The other sports, including like baseball, which, the national pastime, have just sort of faded in relevance, and football has become this behemoth. And I'm not sure anyone could have envisioned that 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
Well, I'll give you a couple of responses to that. The first is that when I was covering the Bulls in those days, I was a general assignment reporter for the All Sports radio station in Chicago in its infancy, 92, 93. So I covered Super Bowls. The first Super Bowl I covered was January of 93. Radio Row at that time was probably 8 radio stations. There were probably 8 radio. In fact, I don't even think it was called Radio Row. There was just an area where they put people. So there was no Radio Row. So that should give you the best indication, if anything, of the way this thing has exploded. It used to be something that 8 radio stations around the country would send, and it was generally like the local stations of the markets that made it. Like the first one I covered was Dallas and Buffalo, and maybe some of the Dallas radio stations were there, and some of the Buffalo radio stations were there, and 1 or 2 others, and that was it. Now it's hundreds of stations. So the level of interest in this thing has grown like a rocket ship, to use the same analogy I used earlier. As far as your other point, I actually don't know that I agree. I don't think that basketball has faded in relevance, and I don't think that baseball has necessarily, well, maybe baseball has to a degree from its apex. But I think comparing anything to football at this point is foolhardy, which is to say nothing compares to football. Pro football, I think, is our nation's obsession. It is the most popular thing in America. But to say something, like, for example, I use this analogy. You can be very rich and not have as much money as Jeffrey Bezos, right? He has $150 billion. You can still be plenty rich. So the NBA, I think, is doing extraordinarily well, all in, financially and otherwise. Major League Baseball is certainly doing very well financially. I think it faces some challenges otherwise. To your point, it isn't as relevant culturally as it was at its apex. But I don't think this is as much about those sports fading as it is about football just leaving everything in its dust. So as compared to football, then yes, certainly. The star power, the significance of all the other sports combined don't really combine or don't really measure up. But that has a lot more to do with the growth of football, I think, than it does with the diminished significance of the other sports.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Did you see it? I mean, did you or others, you think, see this football dominance? I don't know if it's fantasy football, if it's gambling, as we talked about, if it's just a perfect sport for television, for viewing from your couch, especially as TVs have gotten bigger and the production has gotten so much better. What is it that has turned football into this behemoth?
All of the above. The answer is all of the above. It is a perfect storm. And the primary reason is that the direction our culture has moved lends itself perfectly to football and directly away from baseball. I'll give you a story. There was a columnist named Bernie Lincecum who covered sports in Chicago when I was a very young reporter there, and he was an excellent columnist for the Chicago Tribune. And he was someone I looked up to, and he liked me, and we would, whenever we found ourselves in the same place, we would chat, and I always enjoyed hearing his perspective on things. And he once said to me, Mike, the beauty of baseball is all the things that happen in between the action. And that's right. And that is exactly what our society isn't anymore. I have kids. They're not so much kids anymore. They're 23 and 21. But as they were growing up, my son used to love, what was that platform before there was TikTok that the videos were literally 7 seconds long. What was the name of that?
Was that Snapchat?
He would watch. No. Snapchat is still around. It's something that doesn't exist anymore. But they were like little 7 or 8 second videos. Well, whatever it was called, and I'm sure everyone listening to the radio right now is yelling and screaming the answer at us. But whatever it was, that's the direction everything has moved. Everything has moved to quicker, faster, louder. And I think that is exactly the opposite of what baseball is, and it is exactly what football is. So everything that has happened in our culture, to your point, gambling, fantasy, all of those things lend themselves directly to the growth of football. Football is exactly what our culture is in 2024, and baseball is very much what our culture was in 1954. And to their credit, I think the folks who run baseball have tried and are trying really hard and with some success to do what they can about that. But the reality is you can't change the intrinsic nature of these games. And baseball is not a sport whose greatest charms jibe perfectly with the day and age in which we currently live, and football is. And that is the biggest factor. But the answer to the question, why has it grown so much, it's all of those things. It's everything you said. It is all of the above.
That voice you hear is ESPN's Mike Greenberg. Of course, you recognize him. He has a favorite team in the NFL, and that is the New York Jets. And many in this area have a favorite team in the NFL, and that is the woeful Carolina Panthers. Who reaches a Super Bowl first, your New York Jets or our woeful Panthers?
Good God. I don't even know. Probably. I mean, look, I think that the Panthers are one step closer because I think they have bottomed out and maybe they have their quarterback of the future. The Jets, I think, are on their way down. I think the Jets have to go through an entire rebuild, which they haven't even entered yet, which is to say that I do think the Jets will win more games next year than they did this past year. And Rodgers will help enormously if he's healthy. And I think that the Jets will be good. I think the Jets will be a good team next year. But by no means do I think that they're a Super Bowl team, not in a conference that now has Jim Harbaugh coaching Justin Herbert, that has a healthy Joe Burrow, that has a healthy Lamar Jackson, and that has the great Patrick Mahomes. And I've left out a few, Josh Allen and others. The Jets, I don't think, are in that category. The Panthers, at least, I think, can begin the process of building around Bryce Young and trying to figure out how they go about it. The head coach they hired, while not perhaps a household name, obviously did a terrific job this past year with Baker Mayfield, and who is, like Bryce Young, sort of an undersized quarterback who doesn't have nowhere near Bryce Young's natural ability. So I still hold out hope. Look, you're there day in, day out, so you see it far more than I do. Obviously, everything there has been a disaster, but do you see the things in Bryce Young that suggest to you that he can be the answer, that everything around him has to get figured out, but that ultimately he can be the answer?
In a way that everything around him is good, I think he can be the answer. In a Brock Purdy type situation where you have a great running back, great wide receivers, a good offensive line, unfortunately, and when you trade up to number one, you expect that guy to be like Mahomes or Josh Allen or Burrow, someone who can win the games for you. I think he can win you games, but I think the pieces around him are going to have to be, much, much better than they are right now, but really, really good.
Yeah, that's disastrous, of course, because the pick right after him is C.J. Stroud, and that will forever be the comparison because Stroud does appear to be exactly what you just described Bryce Young as not being. So if that is the case, then the Panthers are as far away as you can be, and they don't have their first-round pick this year, and the Jets haven't even gotten there. So let's just say I have a feeling both fan bases are going to be waiting a really long time.
Before we let you go, do you have a Super Bowl pick or at least a way that you think this game might play out?
Yeah, I'm taking Mahomes. I mean, but as you said at the beginning of the conversation, I started my career covering Michael Jordan. And if there's one thing I figured out, it's that Michael Jordan isn't going to win every game. But if you bet on him every game, you're going to win a hell of a lot more than you're going to lose. And that's what I'm going to do. So I don't pick against 15. I think the 49ers look like a team that peaked in November. There was a moment in time this year where I thought they were by far the best team. I don't think that anymore. I think Baltimore was better than them, and KC just knocked them off. I'm not sure Buffalo wasn't better than them, and KC just knocked them off. I'm not picking against Andy. I'm not picking against Patrick Mahomes. I'm not picking against Taylor Swift. I definitely think the Chiefs are going to win.
He certainly reached that, maybe not the heights of Jordan or Brady, but certainly reached that or Tiger, but certainly reached the point where you just can't pick against him.
Oh, I think he's headed that way. I mean, we've had this incredible stat that we've run on Get Up the last couple of days. There has never been a football player who has won 3 championships and 2 MVPs in his first 7 years. There have been 2 basketball players who have, Bill Russell and Larry Bird, 1 hockey player, Guy Lafleur, and 3 baseball players, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, and Stan Musial. I mean, we're talking about royalty. We're talking about we're talking about immortality. We're talking about the greatest of the great, and that is the company that Mahomes is keeping. So I think putting him in there, again, he's got a long ways to go. He's only 28 years old, but I do not think it is overstating it to say he is following in the footsteps of Tiger Woods and Tom Brady and Michael Jordan and LeBron James and Wayne Gretzky and the other all-time greats in all of the sports. I definitely think he is that good.
Well, that was Mike Greenberg with ESPN. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate the time and enjoy the game.
My pleasure. You too.
Thank you.